You've probably spent a few evenings scrolling through options, worrying that the next piece of equipment you buy will end up collecting dust because it either can't handle the job you need or it ends up being a nightmare to set up. The idea of a reliable, easy-to-use spot welder that actually fits in a modest garage, works with the metal you already have, and doesn't bleed your budget is what brings us here. I'm not going to drown you in a list of amps and voltage thresholds. I'll tell you what matters when the power button actually goes on, and what the trade-offs look like once you start using it on real projects. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, let's talk about the environment a typical user will be in. Most hobbyists, small shop owners, or DIY mechanics are dealing with sheet metal that's between 0.8 mm and 2 mm thick, things like automotive fenders, frame brackets, or custom brackets for go-karts. Those projects need a spot weld that can make a clean, strong joint without burning through the material, but they also need a machine that plugs into a standard 110V outlet or the 220V outlet you already have for your MIG welder. The Bsbajan model advertises compatibility with existing aluminum welding machines and even claims you can pair it with a standard MIG setup for a hybrid approach. In practice, that means you can keep your current power source and don't have to buy a whole new generator just to run a benchtop unit. When I actually unboxed the unit, the first thing I noticed was the compact, blocky chassis that sits nicely on a standard workbench. The weight is modest, light enough to move when you need to shift it between a garage bench and a portable job site, but heavy enough that it won't wobble during a weld. The power input selector is simple, a switch that toggles between 110V and 220V, a small knob for setting the pulse duration, and a single foot pedal input for trigger control. There's no menu of confusing screens, which is a relief when you're trying to get a quick weld in and out of a tight space. One of the most practical strengths here is the ability to use the same electrode tips that you'd find with most automotive spot welders. This is a big convenience because you can keep your existing spare parts kit and avoid a situation where a proprietary tip forces you to order a new set every few months. The device also comes with a pair of copper electrodes that are sized for thin gauge steel, and they seem to have enough surface area to distribute the heat evenly, which helps prevent the common problem of burn-through when you're working with thin panels. In real-world use, the first test I ran was a simple repair on a bent front fender from a small sedan. I cleaned the area, aligned the two halves, and stepped on the foot pedal. The weld popped in about half a second, and after cooling I tapped the seam gently with a hammer. The joint held without any sign of cracking or distortion. That speed is actually a big part of why this device feels valuable. You can fix a dent or create a quick bracket without having to set up a welding torch, switch gases, or wear a heavy welding mask for a few seconds. For a weekend hobbyist who wants to patch a rusted patch on a car or build a light rack, that speed translates into more time for the actual project and less time fiddling with gear. On the flip side, there are a couple of practical downsides that matter if you're not just tinkering. First, the device relies on a solid connection between the electrode and the workpiece, so any surface contamination, paint, rust, or oil will reduce weld quality. While that's true for any spot welder, the lack of a built-in cleaning cycle means you need to prep the metal more carefully than you might with a TIG setup that can grind through light rust. Second, the current output is adequate for thin sheet steel, but it struggles when you try to weld anything thicker than roughly 2 mm. I attempted a test on a 3 mm steel bracket and the weld barely held under light pressure. It required multiple passes, which defeats the purpose of a quick spot weld. If your workshop is centered around heavier gauge steel, you'll likely need a higher amp unit. Another nuance is the compatible with aluminum claim. Technically, the machine can drive the high current required for aluminum, but aluminum conducts electricity far differently than steel, so the electrode design and pressure need adjustment. In my testing, the standard steel tips didn't create a solid bond on a 1 mm aluminum sheet unless I swapped to a set of aluminum-specific electrodes, which the package does not include. So if you're primarily planning on welding aluminum frames or boat panels, you'll need to budget for a separate tip set, which adds to the total cost. Now let's talk money. The list price for this BZZ GLA model sits in the mid-range $4,000